Hey, it's time to go to work.
Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, or whenever you decide to come look at this. Today we're going to talk about inking. And the process of inking, historically speaking, was to take your pencil lines from a drawing, go over them with some sort of ink, whether it was pen or permanent marker, to make them ready to be printed. Up until the last 30, 40 years, doing subtle pencils and reproducing them on paper was very difficult to do. So it became easier for people to go over those pencil lines with ink to create an image for mass production. It became its own thing, became its own art style. As you look behind me, inking is what I've been doing for a very long time, at least since 2000. I thought somebody else was going to ink my drawings, and it turned out he was lazy. So I had to do it myself. I'm going to share with you some of the stuff and some tips on inking. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go from there. All right, inking techniques. You can use all kinds of tools to ink. You can use brushes and dip them into an ink well. That works very well. Ha ha ha. You can use Sharpies. You can use microns. You can use Prismacolor inking pens. What you really want is something with archival ink. If it says archival ink on the side, that means its tendency to fade in sunlight is a lot less. It still can fade, but its ability to fade is less than, say, like Crayola. You ink something with Crayola, and that Crayola is going to disappear in probably a summer if you leave it in full sunlight. Or at least it'll turn super brown. When you ink, you want to use different lines. You want to have fluid lines. You want to have straight lines. You want things to vary. You don't want to use the same type of line all the time, because then everything is going to look like a coloring book. A coloring book's objective is for you to fill in the space between the lines. They really don't try very hard, usually, to give you an interesting inking line to work with. As you can take a look down here at these two ladies, one, except for the eyes, is pretty much the same thickness of ink all the way through. And the other one is not. You see a variation. You see some thick, some thin, some going from thick to thin. You see very delicate lines and you see heavy lines. That kind of contrast in your line work makes the inking interesting. When comic book artists ink, it's usually not the artist himself. The guy who does the pencil work is trusting his work to a guy who's going to go over it, thus the title, the inker. In the past, they got a lot of grief. They were called tracers. Well, that's not technically correct. While they did go over that artwork, they made decisions along the way. And a good inker could make artwork better. A bad inker could make art really bad. So the idea is you wanted an inker who is at least on the same level as you as an artist, so that your artwork would at least be consistent. As you take a look here at the Hulk, they shaded in, the artist shaded in the pencil areas where the shadow could go. The inker decided he liked the contrast. So he made some of these areas, instead of being grays, brought them as solid blacks. Up here in the hair, he exacerbated the shading to make it more dramatic. Not only do you have thickness of line, but you also have hatching, which is lines used to create shadow. We talked a little bit about that in value. And we have dot, which is known as stippling or pointillism. I don't think pointillism is all that useful. I do use it on occasion when I want to create a texture. Most of the time, I use lines. Pointillism takes a very long time, and while it can look really cool, you spend a lot of time working on one image. Time that could be better spent working on multiple ideas. Choice is still up to you. If you like pointillism and making images with dots, go right ahead. There are some very famous artists who do that style. Now, as we take a look between the pencil work here of Superman on the left and Superman on the right, the inker has taken liberties. He's taken that whole swoosh at the bottom and created outer space, which is pretty cool. He added some textures back here behind these little waves of sub-power or splitting string theory incident. I don't know what's going on here, but it looks cool, right? We've got the white, we've got a splatter of little dots. There's that pointillism coming in, and it makes just an overall more interesting image. Here, the subject matter is clearly the girl with the syringe holding the chain. You can almost overlook the fact that she's beaten the character Sabretooth because he's just a lump under her boot. Compositionally, she is on 2 of the cross parts for your rule of composition, you know, that tic-tac-toe board that we look at sometimes. And the rest of the background is done as partial silhouettes or just solid blacks, which really make her stand out. Part of that was a decision of the pencil artist. Part of that was a decision of the inker. Other artists who are very heavily into using ink, Frank Miller, the guy who created Sin City and helped direct the movie, and the guy who created the 300 story. Writer, artist, very, very big fan of doing solid black areas and working in ink. I think left to his own devices, pretty much everything he'd do would be in black and white. All right, as we sit here and look at these 2 prints by Albrecht Dürer, who was born in 1471, he revolutionized printmaking because before he came around, hatching was really in its infancy. And you see he was very, very good at bringing in these super thin lines and lines that curve with the body to enhance the form, to make it stand out more. Just amazing work. Even the lines in this piece here tend to angle with the form, and that helps make it look more 3-dimensional. Now, the interesting thing about Albrecht Dürer being that these are woodblock prints, these were made on wood, out of a piece of wood. And everywhere that he wanted to be white, he had to take a gouge or a carving tool and cut away the wood so that when he rolled the wood, the pieces he wanted to stay white were not there. So when you look at these lines, he actually was carving out the space between the lines, almost having to work in negative to make this a positive image. When you think about that, it becomes even more impressive. Quick note on this image. This was such a popular series that he created from the Bible, based on the book of Revelations. These were the 4 horsemen. Now, in the Bible, the 4 horsemen are never named. But because he did this art series, people started to come up with this whole mythology behind the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and thus he inspired people to give them names. There was death, famine, pestilence, and I'm missing one. War. So death, war, famine, and pestilence. And if it hadn't been for this piece of art, that little bit of sci-fi creepy knowledge that ends up in every TV show at some point or other, that's a sci-fi one, would never have existed. Albrecht Dürer was also amazing from the fact that he did this illustration of a rhino based only on the description of a rhino from a guy who had been to Africa. You have to remember, at this point, it was 1515. Not many people went to Africa. There was no internet to look at Africa. no television to look at Africa. Considering this guy described what a rhino looked like and he drew it, it's pretty good. I mean, it looks like a rhino. It looks like a rhino in a suit of armor, which makes it actually even cooler, but it really looks like a rhino. That's pretty amazing. Super cool. Super cool. All right. Bernie Wrightson. Anytime I don't know how to ink something, I look in my Bernie Wrightson books. To me, he was the master of pen and ink. And for the longest time, I thought all of his up and down lines are, all these lines were done with a ruler. They're not. They're organic. They're free flowing. He did them all by hand. And just an amazing, amazing inker. And when you look at this one, this is my favorite piece that he has ever done. If you were to ask me what my favorite piece of any ink piece in the history of art that I would call my favorite, is this one where Frankenstein is meeting the monster, and he's had this attack of conscience where the monster had asked him to create a bride for him, and he started to, and then he destroyed the body, which you actually see on the table here. I looked at this picture for 5 years and showed it to students and never realized there was a dead body on the table because there is so much going on in here. And when you think about a guy who can literally create the illusion of glass with just black, because there are things reading gray to our eye, but those are just black lines closer and farther apart. So that really in itself, absolutely amazing. Glass, skulls, just a wonderful piece altogether. All right, I'm going to stop my sharing and go back to my screen. All right, so following this will be a project that you will be doing in ink. And the reason I'm just not hopping straight into it now is I am trying to create these videos before school starts, so I have the majority of the subject done, and then I can create the assignments as I go, plop these in. So with that in mind, stay tuned a few more minutes and you will find out what your assignment will be for this week. Talk to you later. Have a good day.